Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the William Bonney podcast. Sorry it's a little bit late. I recorded this and went to open it and it didn't save. So I do apologise. Hopefully we can get it out and be just as good again. So today we are doing a profile of a prisoner rather than a prison. It's one of the country's most known, obviously most divisional as well. So I first heard about him when I first went into prison. Another inmate said to me that if you write to him, he will write back to you and send you a picture, some artwork. Now, obviously, I was caught up in all my prison life, so I wasn't really interested in writing to another prisoner and getting some pictures back from him. But obviously, the more you look into Charles Bronson and the more you kind of learn about him, you either love him or you think that he is well deserved in his time in prison. Now, he has done a long time in prison now. He's got a much shorter prison sentence, sort of record, like criminal record than I have, but he spent way more time in prison. He was first arrested as a petty criminal, where he was convicted and sentenced in 1974 to 7 years imprisonment for armed robbery. Further sentences were imposed because of his attacks on prison officers and guards. Upon his release in 1987, he began a bare-knuckle boxing career in the East End of London. His promoter thought he needed a much more suitable name and suggested he changed his name to Charles Bronson after the American actor. He was returned to prison in 1988 on a conviction concerning another robbery. He is a very violent prisoner and has taken numerous hostages in the course of his confrontations with guards, resulting in his life sentence imprisonment that he has now. It's only got a 3-year tariff, but he's been banged up for God knows how long. Long time. He's been held at times in each of England's 3 specialist psychiatric hospitals. Bronson has been featured in many books, interviews, and studies of prison reform and treatment. Bronson has said he's a nice guy, but sometimes he loses it and becomes nasty. That doesn't make me evil, just confused, he said. He was the subject of a 2008 film called Bronson, starring Tom Hardy, a biopic based loosely on his life. Bronson has written many books about his time in prison and famous prisoners that he's met throughout his incarceration. He is a fitness fanatic who has spent many years in segregation from other prisoners. Bronson has even written a book about exercising in confined spaces. He's known as an artist. His paintings and illustrations of prison and psychiatric hospital have been exhibited and won him awards. In 2014, he changed his name again to Charles Salvador in a mark of respect to Salvador Dali, one of his favourite artists. The Charles Salvador Art Foundation was founded to promote his artwork and help those in positions even less fortunate than his own. In 2023, his application for parole was once again rejected. So yeah, he's a very interesting guy, very charismatic. You don't have to watch him for long to either love him or hate him. He's just one of those guys that you either just want to watch and read everything about him, or, you look at his animalistic behavior, the fact people always say he's never killed anyone and he's never hurt any women or children. So what's the harm? What has he really done wrong? Some of the inmates that he's taken hostage and attacked have deserved it, some would say. Some would say that the prison staff and officers that he's taken hostage and hurt have deserved it because of the way he was being treated and the way he's been treated throughout his prison sort of career. So we're going to have a look back basically at his early life, how he grew up, and what really led to where he went. Because his life isn't that different from mine. Working shitty jobs, petty crime, not getting banged up straight away, as a lot of people don't. But then it just got more and more serious, and his propensities of violence really did sort of kick in and got him his long time in prison. So he was born as Michael Gordon Peterson in Luton. He was one of 3 sons. His father later ran a conservative club in Aberystwyth. His uncle and aunt each served as mayor of Luton in the 1960s and 70s. He lived in Luton from the age of 4, but when he was a teenager, his family moved to Ellesmere Port in Cheshire, where he started getting into trouble. By the age of 13, he was part of a gang of 4 robbers, and he was reprimanded in juvenile court after he was caught stealing. He enjoyed fighting from an early age and was often absent from school. Bronson later returned to Luton, which he refers to as his hometown. His first job was at Tesco's, which lasted about a fortnight before he was dismissed for attacking his manager. He passed through a number of jobs after this, working on building sites as a hod carrier and in a number of factories. He was imprisoned for the first time in Risley, serving time on remand for a criminal damage charge after he smashed some parked cars, following an argument with his girlfriend's father. After his trial, he was fined and given probation. Bronson worked as a furniture remover while regularly fighting on his nights out. After being involved in petty crime, he got in serious trouble with the authorities for the first time after crashing a stolen lorry into a car. He was apprehended some 90 miles away from the scene of the accident. The driver of the car survived the collision, but it resulted in Bronson not really facing a serious penalty, and again, he just got fines and probation. After his trial, he returned to petty crime and menial labour. At the age of 19, Bronson was convicted for a part in a smash and grab raid. The judge again gave him a suspended sentence. Now, I was already a year into my prison sentence at 19. I saw all of that 19-year, when I was age 19, I saw all of that in prison. I didn't get out until I was 21. So I was already in prison, in sort of a timeline when he was still given suspended sentences and things such like. He met Irene Kelsey in 1971, who described him as so different from any other boys she knew. He always wore tailored suits and had a perfectly groomed sideburns and a Cockney accent. 8 months later, in 1972, when Kelsey was 4 months pregnant, the couple married at Chester Registry Office. Their son is called Michael Jonathan Peterson. 5 years later, they were divorced, and Kelsey later went on to remarry. Bronson was convicted of armed robbery in 1974, aged 22, and sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. He was sent to Walton Jail and soon ended up in the punishment block after attacking 2 prisoners without being provoked. He was then transferred to Hull in 1975. After refusing to work in prison, he smashed up a workshop after an altercation with a prison officer and was sent to the prison in punishment block. He was injected with a sedative which made him violently ill, and 6 months were added to his sentence. After recovering, he continued to prove a highly challenging inmate and was repeatedly placed in solitary confinement for several months. He attacked fellow prisoner John Gallagher with a glass jug and was charged with grievous bodily harm. Charges were later dropped to unlawful wounding and he was convicted. 9 months were added onto his sentence. It was then he was transferred to Armley Jail. Bronson found that his reputation as a violent and highly dangerous inmate preceded him. Between 1975 and 1977, he switched between Armley, Wakefield, Parkhurst and Walton prisons. He was then taken from Yorkshire to London, chained to the floor of a prison van. Kept in solitary confinement, he began a fitness program. He continued to attack other convicts and damage prison property. While recovering in solitary confinement for a beating given to him for punching 2 prison officers, Bronson was handed his divorce papers, filed by his wife. At Wandsworth, he attempted to poison the prisoner in the cell next to him. He was moved to Parkhurst Prison in 1976, where he befriended the Cray twins, whom he described as the best 2 guys he'd ever met. He was moved back to Wandsworth after threatening to kill a prison officer. He spent 4 months in isolation after he was caught trying to dig his way out of his cell. After being returned to the prisoner's main population, he caught up with the prisoner who had informed on his escape plan and attacked him, scarring him for life. The governor at Wandsworth wanted to transfer Bronson out of his facility, and the only place that would have him was the C unit, the psychiatric wing at Parkhurst. It was the only place that they would accept him. Bronson was returned to the Isle of Wight. There he attacked a prisoner with a jam jar, and he was again charged with grievous bodily harm. He attempted suicide and attacked another prison officer and was made subject to a transfer direction under the Mental Health Act. In 1978, Bronson arrived at Broadmoor, but was soon transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital. Unable to adapt to forced medication and in the company of highly disturbed and highly dangerous patients, Bronson attempted to strangle a child rapist and murderer, John White. He was apprehended just as White was giving out his death rattle. Bronson was returned to Broadmoor, where he reunited with Ronnie Cray. At Broadmoor, Bronson attempted to strangle Gordon Robinson to death, but was prevented from doing so by the tearing of the silk tie he was using. Following this failure, Bronson became depressed, but found his spirits lifted when Ronnie Cray arranged a visit from boxer Terry Downs. In 1982, he performed his first rooftop protest after escaping to the top of Broadmoor. He tore off roof tiles. Not long after the first incident, again, he reached the roof of Broadmoor and he caused £250,000 worth of damage in a 3-day protest before he was talked down by his family. Following further treatment, he took up art, eventually receiving more prison awards than any other inmate for his poems and cartoons. He made a third rooftop protest, this time demanding a prison transfer, but again was talked down. He began an 18-day-long hunger strike and was eventually granted a transfer to Ashworth Hospital, then known as Park Lane Hospital. Though Bronson was more settled in the modern facilities and regime at Ashworth, he soon returned to his previous behaviour. He used a sauce bottle to stab Marvin Hawley, a patient who had made sexual advances towards him. He was returned to the general population at Risley Remand Centre in 1985, but was placed in isolation after punching a fellow inmate. In May 1985, Bronson pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm for the attack on Hawley, and 3 years were added to his sentence. Later, he was returned to Walton, where he made another 3-day rooftop protest, this time causing £100,000 worth of damage. Authorities added another year to his sentence. He was moved to Albany, where he punched another convict on his first day in general population. He was again quickly moved to Wormwood Scrubs, and 2 weeks later he was returned to Wandsworth. In 1986, Bronson was transferred 8 times, the only new location being Winchester. He strangled the governor of Wormwood Scrubs during one particularly violent episode. In January 1987, he was transferred to Gartree, where he served the rest of his sentence in isolation. Other than 10 days, he spent in nearby Leicester Prison. Upon his release from Gartree Prison, he was met by his family and stayed with his parents for a few days in Aberystwyth. He journeyed by train to London, bought a water pistol, modified it, and used it to intimidate a stranger into driving him to Luton. God knows why anyone would want to go to Luton. Bronson embarked on a short-lived career in illegal bare-knuckle boxing in the East End of London on the advice of long-term friend Reggie Cray. He changed his name from Michael Peterson to Charles Bronson on the advice of his fight promoter Paul Edmonds, although he'd never seen a film starring the American actor Charles Bronson. He offered to fight Lenny McLean, but was refused. He also said one time that he killed a Rottweiler with his bare hands in a £10,000 underground fight. He later said it was not something he was proud of because he loves animals. To the surprise of his girlfriend Alison on New Year's Day in 1988, he robbed a jewellery shop and kept a ring for her and sold the rest of the jewellery. On his 69th day of freedom, he was apprehended and arrested on his morning jog. The arresting officers charged him under his fighting name, Charles Bronson, and he decided at that moment to give up the name Michael Peterson. He was returned to Leicester Prison, as Bedford Prison refused to house him on account of his uncontrollable behaviour during his first stretch in prison. His defence had looked strong, as eyewitnesses refused to testify for fear of reprisals. His girlfriend Alison then retracted her initial testimony and became the prosecution's main witness. This not only removed Bronson's alibi, but gave the prosecution all the evidence they needed to win the case. Bronson made a failed bid to reach the prison roof and was transferred to Brixton. Bronson was placed in a top secure unit of 16 prisoners at Brixton. In June 1998, he pleaded guilty to the armed robbery and again was sentenced to 7 years. Bronson was moved to Wandsworth Prison before transferring out to Full Sutton. There he spent most of his time in isolation for punching a prisoner and a prison officer and throwing water on the governor. He also spent a month at Durham, where he bonded with a family of rodents that crept in his cell. In 1989, he was moved to Long Lartin and seemed to settle at the prison. However, he eventually went over the edge and ran riot in the nude. Clutching onto a spear he fashioned out of a broken bottle and a broom handle. After another incident in which Bronson began a one-man riot, he was placed in isolation. He spent 2 months at Bristol before being moved to Birmingham, Winchester, and back to Wandsworth in September 1989. He was regularly moved and frequently in trouble, particularly so when he punched 2 officers at Gartree and took the Deputy Governor hostage at Frankland. At Parkhurst, he was on the receiving end of an attack, where at least 2 prisoners stabbed him in the back several times. Bronson refused to speak to the police about it. He recovered from the attack without any further incidents and was released from prison in 1992. This time, Bronson spent 53 days as a free man before being arrested once more, this time for conspiracy to rob. He was remanded at the newly opened Wood Hill prison, but insisted that his girlfriend Kellyanne, her friend Carol, and her lover were lying to the police in order to get him locked away. February 1993, the charges of robbery were dismissed. He was given a £600 fine for breaking the nose of Kellyanne's lover. 16 days later, he was arrested for conspiracy to rob and possession of a sawn-off shotgun. On remand in Wood Hill, he took a civilian librarian hostage and demanded an inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea from police negotiators. He released the hostage after being disgusted when the man farted in front of him. Bronson was taken from Belmarsh to Bullingdon prison for his trial. For the trial, he pleaded guilty to possessing the shotgun, but not guilty to the conspiracy charges. He told the jury he had intended to use the shotgun to blow his own head off. In September 1993, he was found guilty of intent to rob and not guilty of conspiracy to rob, while his co-defendant was found innocent of all charges. He was given an 8-year sentence this time. Bronson was taken from Belmarsh to Wakefield, where he spent 40 days naked in isolation. He was transferred to Hull in November, where he spent a number of months without incident before he took the Deputy Governor Adrian Wallace hostage on Easter Monday 1994. He was overpowered by guards and transferred to Leicester. He was returned to Wakefield, where he was confined in what was known as the Hannibal cage, previously occupied by Robert Maudsley. While there, prison officers Mick O'Hagan and Alan Jarvis encouraged Bronson to take up art, where he began concentrating on the cartooning. Bronson's father died in September 1994 during a period when Bronson was in constant solitary confinement and was moved almost weekly. He attacked the governor at High Down, who had felt safe enough to visit Bronson on his own in his cell, telling the prison officers that he's okay with me. At Lincoln, he was allowed to spend time with children with Down syndrome. He was taken out of solitary confinement and placed back on the prison wings after getting along so well with the children. He was returned to solitary after returning 30 minutes late from a 30-minute exercise period. In April 1996, he was sent back to Belmarsh after taking a doctor hostage at Birmingham. 5 months later, an Iraqi hijacker bumped into him in the canteen and did not apologise. After a long period of brooding, Bronson took 2 other Iraqi hijackers, along with another inmate named Jason Greasley, hostage in his cell. By his own admission, he was losing it badly and ranted about his dead father, saying that any funny business would result in him snapping necks. He sang and laughed and forced the Iraqis to tickle his feet and call him general. He demanded a plane to take him to Libya, 2 Uzi submachine guns, and 5,000 rounds of ammunition, and an axe. He released Greasley, but began chanting, "I want ice cream." He felt guilty after hitting one of the hostages with a metal tray, and therefore insisted that the same hostage hit him over the head 4 times as to call it quits. He slashed himself 4 times with a safety razor, but agreed to release the hostages and walk back to the segregation unit. Another 7 years were added to his sentence, though this was reduced to 5 on appeal. In October 1996, Bronson was unsettled as he had an unexpected visit from Robert Taylor, a doctor, instead of his regular lawyer. He took Taylor hostage, but released him 30 minutes later after coming to his sentence. Taylor refused to assist in any kind of prosecution. In 1999, he took Phil Danielson, a civilian education worker, hostage, as he had criticised one of Bronson's drawings. Bronson tore up the prison, throwing refrigeration units and furniture around. He was shocked and knocked unconscious for a few minutes when wrenching a washing machine out of the wall. The siege lasted for 44 hours before Bronson released Danielson. He was then transferred to Whitemore. For the incident, Bronson received a discretionary life sentence to run with a minimum of 3 years. Later in 1999, a special prison unit was set up at Wood Hill for Bronson, Robert Maudsley and Reginald Wilson to reduce the risk they posed to staff and other prisoners. Danielson received a $65,000 in compensation from the Home Office in an out-of-court settlement, although the prison service did not admit any liability for negligence in failing to protect a civilian employee. Now, he was given a life sentence with a 3-year tariff, which basically means that you do a 3-year sentence. It's a really low life sentence, obviously. I mean, like if you murder someone, it's a mandatory life, which is 15 years. You can obviously get 20, 30, 40-year life sentences. But he was only given 3 years. Now, the shortest I've seen is 4 years. But that doesn't mean you're going to get out after that 3 years. It basically means that at any point after that, the parole board can sit and they can basically have a look at you. Everybody pretty much knows you're never going to get out on your first 2 or 3 hearings because nobody wants to be the one who releases you straight away. So parole boards will normally sit at least 3-4 times before they release you. So in reality, he could be out after 6 or 7 years. But this is 1999, so it's 24 years later, and he's still not out from a 3-year life sentence. And basically, even when you get out, you're going to be on a life license, so you'll always have to go to probation. You'll always be under restrictions and under limitations for your crimes. In 2001, Bronson married again, this time at HMP Wood Hill, to Fatima Rahman, a Bangladeshi-born divorcee. She had seen his picture and an article about him in the newspaper and began writing to him. Rahman had visited Bronson 10 times before they were married. She had worked at a women's shelter before they met, but lost her job when the employer found out about the relationship. For a short time, Bronson converted to his wife's faith of Islam and wished to be known as Charles Ali Ahmed, but did not change his name legally. After 4 years, he and Rahman divorced, and he renounced Islam. During this period, Bronson appealed against his life sentence, but 3 appeal court judges rejected his application in 2004. In court, with 6 prison guards surrounding him, Bronson said that his wife and her daughter were helping him to rehabilitate, and references about his character, including reports from psychiatrists, were positive on this occasion. In 2007, 2 prison staff members at Full Sutton High Security Dispersal Prison were involved in a control and restraint incident in an attempt to prevent another hostage situation, during which Bronson had his tinted glasses broken. Bronson received £200 compensation for his broken glasses. Now, Bronson wore glasses. You've seen them, the funny little round ones. He said because his eyes are bad from all the unnatural light that he's had and his years in solitary confinement. He said, years of loneliness in small cells have left me paranoid about people invading my space. Now I can't stand people getting too close, crowding me. I hate people breathing on me. I hate smelly bodies coming near me. Mouths are simply for eating, never kissing. A man needs a routine to cope with such extreme situation. For me, it's my push-ups and sit-ups. I also pace around the room and count each step. Some I know lie down on their beds for 3 hours on one side, 3 hours on the other, and then 3 hours on their back. Bronson remained a Category A prisoner when he was moved to Wakefield High Security Prison. He was due for a parole hearing in September 2008, but this was postponed when his lawyer objected to a 1-hour parole interview, requesting that a full day to deal with Bronson's case was needed. The parole hearing took place on March 11, 2009, and the parole board refused his parole shortly afterwards. In August 2013, a petition with 10,000 signatures on it was presented to 10 Downing Street calling for his release. In an enclosed note, Bronson appealed to the Prime Minister David Cameron for him to be able to live what's left of his life and to not be buried in the prison system. In 2014, Bronson violently attacked the prison governor with a television in the television room at HMP Wood Hill over a dispute that his mail was being withheld, including 2 letters from his mother. The governor had serious bruising. In 2014, Bronson was sentenced to 2 more years in prison, even though the prison had accepted that his mail may have been unacceptably processed. Bronson announced that same time that he was changing his name via Depot to Charles Salvador in tribute to the artist Salvador Dali. In a handwritten statement on his website, Salvador stated that the old me dried up. Bronson came alive in 1987 and he died in 2014. Under this new name, he began creating works of art described as fantasy reality. A collection of these works were auctioned in 2014. Salvador proposed to the actress Paula Williamson during a prison visit on the 13th of February 2017, and it was accepted. She had been visiting him for 5 months. According to Williamson, Charles is a changed man, and it's my hope that he will be released for my 40th birthday. August 2020. Williamson, who had minor roles in Coronation Street and Emmerdale, married Salvador in prison in the chapel on the 14th of November 2017. It became known in July 2018 that Bronson asked for a divorce after photo evidence of a young British holidaygoer motorboating on her chest and inviting him and his friends to her apartment whilst on holiday in Tenerife was leaked to a local national newspaper. She claimed he requested his wife to wear a catsuit when she next visited him, a suggestion she rejected. In July 2019, Williamson, aged 38, was found dead in her home in Stoke-on-Trent. Her death was not considered suspicious by the police. In 2017, Bronson contacted a newspaper photographer, George Bambi, after recognising his name on a Channel 4 documentary. After the meeting, Bronson gave Bambi hair samples for DNA testing. Bambi has since produced a certificate claiming that there is a 99.98% chance that he is Bronson's son. In November 2018, Bronson was found not guilty at Leeds Crown Court after being tried for attempting to cause grievous bodily harm with intent. The incident, the previous January, had involved Mark Doherty, the governor at Wakefield Prison. For the first time in 44 years in prison, I have never intended to be violent. I never meant to hurt the governor, Bronson told the court via video link, while defending himself. Shortly after his acquittal, he was moved to HMP Wood Hill. In June 2020, Bronson won a High Court battle for the right for his parole board meeting to be held in public, citing the right to a fair trial. In early 2023, it was reported that Bronson would go before the parole board in March of that year. He was denied parole, with the parole board stating that they were not satisfied that Salvador was suitable for release, nor did the panel recommend that the Secretary of State would transfer him to an open prison. Now, I spoke in one of my other videos about Bambi. It turns out that he is not Charles Bronson's son. He's a reporter, he's a journalist, he's a photographer. They cooked up the story. Charles Bronson and Bambi both cooked up the story after Charles Bronson got in contact with him. They made up a lot of stories. They made up the whole son thing. And it's basically all just garbage to help try and keep Bronson in the public eye and to keep him relevant so that he could probably have a better chance of getting his parole if the public was on his side, because the public love him. You know, he's one of these, again, he's a very controversial character. People either love him or hate him. And a lot of people do enjoy, he's like the Gaza of criminals. You either see the brilliance of him or you see the demon side of him. I'd love to know what you think. I've done my best to obviously be as fair and just read out factually everything that Bronson's done. Like I say, he's probably going to be one of these guys who dies in prison or doesn't get let out until he's a very old or sick man, within months of his death. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like I say, if you write to him, you may get a letter back from him, or a painting or some artwork, which is interesting if nothing else. It's a great look into his very troubled mind, seeing his artwork. So let me know what you think. Like, subscribe. Sorry about it being a little bit late today, but we'll have another episode of the William Bonney Weekly Podcast on Wednesday, where we'll talk some more about everything that's going on. All right, thank you very much. Cheers now.